Knights of the Hunt 2. Sorry to bother you, my lady. But where might I find the cathedral ward? The comely woman looked back at him, her expression of strange uncertainty gradually changing into one of haughty scorn. Where do you think? Caddock looked around the area and shook his head. Have you ever seen a cathedral before, good sir? Well, yes, but I was more asking for directions. She rolled her eyes. Oh, as if you have not heard of the life-giving Church of Yharnam. It lies over... She bit her tongue and suddenly looked around very nervously, but was, regardless, quick to compose herself. Well, over the bridge, I meant to say. Go down there and you'll be upon the plaza from which you'll see the rest. Ah, thank you, my lady. He made a quick bow. She nodded and managed to squeeze out a smile from her frowning expression. He followed her instructions until the town began to change, having crossed over the aforementioned bridge. Crossing it was surreal for many reasons. Seeing how it was the largest bridge he had ever seen in a town. Not to mention that the town itself was monstrously large. And what lay below the bridge. A part of town that might as well still be smouldering from the fire that had once rendered it ashen and black. Never could he have foreseen, nor could it have been properly relayed in writing, the nature of the town of his destination. The cathedral ward must have been the place of the ruling class, at least according to him. Everyone out in the street looked of noble descent in regards to their demeanor and appearance. But among them soon distinguished the class that must be the clerics. All wearing more or less the same white or black attire, all with some sort of shawl or mantle of similar design. Strange, but not unheard of, that the church would hold such authority. Walking upon a round plaza that lay just before the incredible and iconic clock tower of Yharnam, he recognized the environment from his given description, spotting the crown of a large tree between the ornate houses. Next, he found himself stumped by the conundrum of finding his way to its roots, as no matter of how much he walked around in the streets and small passageways, there seemed to be no direct route to it. He recalled an encouragement of being creative, so he simply leapt over a wall surrounding a communal garden that gave him vantage into another garden area just around the great tree. From where he sat perched, he could run up on the adjacent roof and along it onto a much lower balcony that allowed for him a safe landing into the garden with a small stone house that could almost pass as a tiny unorthodox chapel. Only one other individual was present. A man with his face completely covered by the collar of his coat and the brim of a wide hat seemed barely to acknowledge his entry. It was a very pleasant place, and he appreciated the effort put into creating such a sanctuary in the middle of the densest of towns. Curious, he made his way towards the house when another man garbed in a somewhat familiar designed black coat with a long feathered cape emerged. A stern gaze looked back at him. A man with pitch black hair tied behind his head and with vibrant green eyes. He motioned for him to approach before turning to walk back inside. The interior was as quaint as the garden, with warm light and crowded shelves and tables, despite the small area. What immediately caught him was a life-sized doll sitting upright by the innermost wall near the corner. So real that it could have been mistaken for a person.
Don't mind her. Just, well, I don't know.
The man gestured limply towards her, pulled out a chair and motioned for him to sit. Caddock did so. Upon the table lay a wrapped package, further upon which sat a beaked mask. The man lay a unique blade next to it, somewhat akin to a snake's tongue or a bird's talon, shining like the purest silver.
That and her, both made by the master.
He retrieved a small, round amulet from his inner coat and held it up towards him.
This here is a mark of your work.
It was a black badge, a circle with a floral pattern emerging along the circle's edge and culminating at its downward end. It made him think about a bird in flight.
No more dreams for me. The master deserved her.
He lightly shook his head, releasing the thought from him in the process.
Anyway, you know how it is done. Many here are bound for the dream.
He tugged at his lower eyelid so the eye became enlarged in its socket and glared at him.
You'll see it in their eyes. Otherwise, you'll recognize it. Won't you?
He nodded. So did the man in response.
And, well, I suppose I could say that you'd better be wary once your time comes, when you can no longer carry that badge.
Do you think about returning home?
Never. That's not why I gave you the badge.
They said nothing for a time, both their eyes being drawn to the crackling fire instead. Is there something I should be aware of?
Not particularly. You know the prayer. Perhaps Ludwig. Suppose he might take over the hunters here soon. Or German as well.
German?
Master of the hunters. Not around, but you'll become acquainted soon enough. Plenty of talk among the hunters. And, well, a man like him does not truly die.
Then he left.
I'll have none of it, you hear? Be gone with ya.
The door closed inches from Lillian's nose, and she jumped back by the gust it produced. She stepped back out onto the street, circling an oak, and looked up at the towering facade. She could spot a curtain next to the front door being tucked aside, and the swift visage of the woman that had demanded her to leave peer out at her before reinforcing the veil. She was surprised at the level of hostility, for no previous interviewee had received her in such a manner, but it caused her to feel disheartened by her enterprise. While it may have been the first rude interaction, it was consistent with the amount of information gleaned. None had been wiser than the other. She began walking along the circling sidewalk and out onto the main street, where she slowly and sullenly made her way to the last lead. Prior, an older gentleman had invited her for tea and had proceeded to talk lengthy about his ancestry and their supposed part to play in the initial construction of the town, which hardly had merit considering how old it was. Once asked about his vanished brother, he had acted as if he had no recollection of it. A woman was deprived of her consistent smile when asked about her son, and continued to relay her emotions through quiet and stuttering sobs. She had noticed in her reading of Cadoc's files and documents that for a period only males seemed to disappear. In a period around 10 years ago, only males in the range of 18 and 40 had been the sole target, until women joined the absconded, as well as the widening age group. It had never been pointed out by Cadoc, but she wondered much about it. In her wonder, quick footsteps approached behind her. A man was crossing the street towards her. He had his collar raised, hat pulled down low, and hands in his pockets as he walked, looking somewhat nefarious as he did so. He approached so swiftly that she was taken aback, but felt a bit calmer once she saw the young and handsome face that turned up towards her. "Miss? Sorry, miss. You talked with Mrs. Mackey earlier, right?" "I did." He removed his hat and held it in front of him with both hands, revealing shortly trimmed curly brown locks. I'm her son, and I caught the last of your conversation, and that you later spoke with others about some disappearances." "That is true." He looked around the mostly empty street and composed himself. Dear mother might not know about father, but I do. And now that you come asking, I think it's due time I put it out there." "Oh, please do." "You see, I was a boy then. I wager mother did not tell you much." He posed the question more like a statement, hence her long pause before realizing he had actually expected an answer. "Oh, she was rather shaken up. But no, she had no knowledge of your father's vanishing. My condolences. He nodded. I heard him coming home that night. I don't think neither of them knew I saw. I always pretended to be asleep when I heard footsteps outside. But at any rate, it was just any night. I did not decide to look outside just for nothing. I had heard him stopping by the door. It never opened, you see. For a long time I heard nothing. That's when I leaned over and peered out through. Since he had begun his recollection, he had nervously fixed his gaze to something behind her, and kept it there while he spoke, more and more crumpling his hat in his grip. Additionally, his eyes had grown increasingly vacant, almost glazed over, just as if he saw the view of his description transpiring then and there. Someone stood there. A caped man, or I don't know what. He stood perfectly still when my dad came into view. The stranger allowed Dad to get close. He looked angry. My father, I mean. Throwing his hands around as if telling him to leave. I heard only his muffled voice the entire time, but it was silenced. He closed his eyes and shook his head. I don't know what happened. The stranger just stepped in and grabbed him. Like a hug, and Dad became quiet. I thought at least that it looked like a strange hug then. I know now that it must have killed him then. Lillian could not help the gasp that escaped her. I think it like sucked him up. Or at least parts of him. It took something. Like a cloud of darkness came around them, and Dad was just gone. Nothing left. Well, a dark stain lay at the stranger's feet. I don't recall if it was there the next day. I did not look anymore. Just threw myself back into bed and pulled the cover over my face. He had begun to tremble with his hands. Hesitantly, but as warmly as she could, she comfortingly rubbed her hand on his shoulder. He could not evidently cease with his trembles, and tucked one hand in his pocket, while concealing the one holding the hat behind his back. Lillian blinked the astonishment away from her face, but not successfully banishing it completely. How long ago did you say this was? A little over 11 years now. She felt at a loss. Her mind was unable to form anything resemblant of interview structure. Initially she wanted to write it off as imagination. Vivid nightmares of a frightened child that was prone to see spectral horrors in any shadowy corner. But had not Caddock advised against making conclusions for the person of interest? Additionally, there was of course the dominant source for her desire to neglect his claim, namely the horrific prospect of the young man's experience being true. Do you perhaps remember anything about your late father? something that was noticeable following his disappearance? He shook his head and delivered the answer quickly. No. Mother was dead set on not speaking of him. So no one did. At least around me. As I recall, life found a way to carry on. To your knowledge, could this occurrence be a product of your father's acquaintances? Someone wanting to harm him? He was a carpenter, working for a small enterprise. Granted, I know little of his private life, but with that lifestyle in mind, I would say no. If you don't mind, and I apologize for any pain it may bring, but could you please try and remember anything more about the perpetrator? He lingered with the words, hesitant to give them form. Well, he had a cape that was tattooed at the ends. But there must have been some magic that... He had no weapon that I saw him use. But for appearance, anything more distinct? I don't know. I think he must have had some armor, plenty of jewelry, for he glistened in the streetlight, shimmering in both silver and gold. He had white hair hanging over his face, silvery white. Oh, he had red attire, or at least I saw some red lined with a glistening gold around his boots. The end of his coat, I think. Red. Rather uncommon, even back then. Yeah. I apologize to bring it up further, but what do you remember happening specifically to the body? Well, I can't really trust what I saw, I feel like. He blew away, like he never had been there in the first place. That's why it seemed something was sucked out of him. Beast sighted out of Old Yarnham, by testimony of local witnesses that bravely retold the paper about their horrific account. Young Willoughby and Lorelei had supposedly alerted their father to a threat nearby, and goodly so, for the sturdy Father Eric, brave attendant in the nightly hunts, decided to investigate and happened upon a depraved fiend that within all likelihood crawled its way out from the restricted Old Yarnham district. The courage of local Eric is commended by all of his actions, of sending his wife and 2 children with a message to the church hunters. Reports later say that the battle was a fierce one, and had it not been for Eric's marvelous quick wits, determination and faith in the gods, the threat would likely not have been observed in time. Church hunters came upon the scene to find the man still struggling, but by accounts would later perish in his selfless ordeal. Church hunters were kind to impart the paper's writers with their own observations that spoke only of reverence for the pious and sacrificial act of one of Yarnham's best and bravest. They encourage all people hereby to dedicate a moment of reflection to this man's fate, and what it truly meant to combat the scourge. To be wary at all times for what might lurk in the darkened corners of our town. The hunters closed their statement by adding, "Never lose hope in the church, hunters and their judgment, for none know the nature of the beast greater than those affiliated to the church itself." Caddoc let a contemptuous scoff escape him as he came to the article's end. He pictured how the church bestowed a medallion onto itself from how the article was written, seeing how its funds came from that direction. Shaking his head, he found that his engagement in the current news had faded, even dried up completely, and the paper was folded and placed on the table. He listened for a moment to the sound of Lillian's writing and the creaking of the chair she twisted in while doing so. His gaze came to wander over to the window. The grey light of the early afternoon on a cloudy day left the scenery feeling just as gloomy as the impression he had received from the paper. From his window he had an overview of the street he lived upon, with an adjacent windowless stone wall opposite his window, separated by an alleyway. On the grand street of his residence, that was void of foot traffic momentarily, a woman came walking down in his direction. She was dressed in an overcoat, sturdy leather boots, and gloves while sporting a black top hat. Any woman that dressed such was recognizable, at least to him, as a hunter. If not the attire had spoken the volumes they did, the hefty hunk of iron formed like a brick, slung over her back, and the sword at her side certainly defined her as one of Ludwig's, perhaps even as one of the holy blades. He stood up from the table and started walking over to the flight of descending stairs. Having managed to reach its middle, someone knocked at the door. He opened, and there stood the woman. "Caddoc, I'm Henriette." She reached out a hand firmly and quickly, and he shook it accordingly. "The captain sends his regards. May I come in?" He stepped out of her way, turned, and shortly thereafter heard the satisfying latch of the lock as the key turned.
"Tea, perhaps?"
"I'm fine."
She was quick to follow him. At the landing, Lillian peeked out her head to see the new visitor.
"There's a room here."
Caddoc gestured forward and upward to Henriette, and Lillian scurried away back into the aforementioned space.
"I'm thrilled,"
Henriette said in a tone that could much easier be interpreted as many other things before one would consider excitement. When she walked into the small office and stared at the sizable wall of information in front of her, it became apparent just how small the room was, at least to Caddoc. He excused himself mentally, with that he never anticipated such an amount of people would find themselves therein at the same time. With a loud thud she relieved herself of the incredible hammerhead slung on her back, a sound of such properties that it caused Lillian to jump slightly where she stood. The space between Henriette's eyebrows frowned, not too dissimilar to that of a predator when she beheld his work.
"I have been curious."
She started.
"What's all the fuss about hunters disappearing?
Have they not done so since forever? Her head turned to him with such accusatory fervor that her blonde hair fell in front of her right eye, having freed itself from the immaculate braid she kept it in. While correcting it, she removed her top hat and tossed it onto the table.
You are not the first to ask me that.
So what's the answer? To my knowledge, none tried to explain away the reasoning behind why prospectors vanished in the labyrinth. It comes with a job. Simple as that. Lillian shifted her eyes to him at the mention of the prospectors. The gesture was filled with frightened curiosity, surely noticed by Henriette, who directed her attention to her, filled with a probable frustration of having spoken of things the commoner had little understanding of. And who is this helper of yours?
Lillian. A victim of the crime, you could say.
Henriette nodded with discreet contempt.
Is there any more complaints?
He calmly asked, to which she only turned up her nose in response.
The prospector's vanishing,
he looked at Lillian,
is after all rather simple to explain, though it cannot be reasoned. I agree it is not a topic worth pursuing, for the culprit is obvious. The labyrinth itself, simply put. For you see, the difference was that people left of their own, never to return.
Yes, Henriette sharply interjected. And we too have an obvious culprit. The hunter of hunters. Not to mention the scourge itself. Caddock smiled and nodded, a nod that transitioned into him shaking his head.
Have you compiled the names?
She rolled her eyes and retrieved a folded paper from her inner pocket. Many start to wonder about your work, Master Caddock. Especially now that these names have been uttered once more. He took the paper, and she continued. They never felt obliged to find out the truth. It was a face of remorse that suddenly painted over Henriette's harsh expression. Like the prospectors, we know that our work has its hazards. One day a friend might not return. Something you should know. Why then ask where they went, when the answer is both obvious and difficult to grasp?
Aha! Well, there I disagree, for it is not obvious.
He peered down briefly at the row of names.
Yes, these have suffered the fate of the hunt. A proper one, that I hope finds them some peace, now that they eternally are rested from it. I would say they are lucky, for we know their fate.
He looked over at Lillian, who lit up and pointed to an area on the board with some names with much smaller notes added around them. But distinguished was the title of the bundle, reading Canehurst. We have found more obscure accounts. Well, actually, not that many. But at any rate, we have found that some disappearances appear much more nefariously conducted and do not at all match with the work of any hunter of hunters. Canehurst? Henriette mumbled and squinted her eyes. Lillian continued.
Yes, that's who we believe might be responsible. Or at least someone with ties to them. What? How even? Oh, I have it here.
She rummaged around the papers and started placing some of them into a pile before her. Copied pages of literature, letters, old newspapers articles and written testimonies. Henriette was quick to wave it all off.
Would you skip to what you think they are doing?
Lillian appeared dismayed, for the enthusiasm with which she had bundled the information together hinted at her being well prepared to give a lengthy answer, which was now brushed aside.
Alright. Well, we cannot determine properly when it all started, but it has been going on for a really long time. Years and years of time. But all things we have uncovered...
She pressed her fingers on the bundle of evidence.
Heavily indicate Cainhurst's involvement. But Logarius and the executioner's march on the castle makes it all the more elusive. That is, it poses the question if it somehow prompted them to begin this pattern, or Logarius became aware of it well before we did, and responded.
But as you know,
Caddock added,
we cannot ask the man himself, nor any of his men. But with the names from the current Hunter of Hunters.
He waved with the paper Henriette had provided.
We can account for a great deal of people. The Scourge, the Crow.
He motioned for the wall of information.
Or something else.
All semblance of skepticism had now left Henriette, and her eyes were kept focused on the evidence with a greedy stare.
I see. So, Cainhurst, you say?
Yes. Someone is out there. Someone with the skill to silently steal away hunters and civilians alike. Quite a formidable foe. We cannot say for sure for how long, but the first account that we know of comes from when the cathedral ward was yet finished. They grow in frequency, then they stop around the time of the executioner's march, but resume with less discrimination.
So, was it only hunters before Logarius?
No. Some were normal people, but curiously, all were men. Now, it's anyone.
Henriette stepped closer to read the names linked with Cainhurst. While she did not voice it, Caddock saw her eyes twitch, widening very unnoticeably when she saw a familiar name.
I wanted to add, Miss Henriette.
Lillian carefully said.
I, for one, never took the time to consider the plight of the hunters. How you said you lament your fallen peers.
Henriette turned abruptly to look at her, like she had only heard the last of her sentence.
I wanted to add, My James did not become a beast. I know you think he must have, but I cannot accept it. Amidst all that vanish, those we love, we cannot give up on them.
The church hunter sighed and nodded, then leaned back, crossing her arms with a determined look fit for a hunt.
So, Cain asked, the castle lies abandoned, no?
By all accounts. I will have to see it for myself. If there is the possibility of noble vestiges, and in what capacity?
I will start investigate these names.
Lillian eagerly said and reached out for the note Caddock was still holding. Henriette glanced worriedly in between the two.
Oh, for God's sake!
Her hesitation turned into frustration when Caddock walked past her and out of the room.
You mean to go this instant?
No better time than the present.
I will have to accompany you. Hemwick is a very dubious place, if you had not noticed.
I had indeed. I was hoping they would answer some of my questions even.
She let out another frustrated sigh, grabbed the hammerhead and hurried after him down the stairs. When he had taken a few steps outside, and hearing the door being closed by her, she quickly came up to his side and asked in a perturbed tone,
You just wanted someone more official to follow along.
He smirked cheekily as they set off towards the edge of town. Hemwick was once like any other settlement around Yarnam. What made it significant in the past was it being based around the great bridge leading to the island of old Castle Cainhurst. Once it had been a pleasant farmland that served the nobles with its bounty. But seeing how the nobles had long since gone quiet, their appetite had likely followed. And so it seemed that the residents of Hemwick were at a desperate loss for purpose. That was at least the impression, seeing how their settlement had slowly degraded, its cattle dying out and the area being overgrown by everything but crops. But perhaps their state of mind was justified, seeing that from the other direction to the castle, graves started to encroach on their land. A place of life was now slowly overtaken by growing monuments of death. The dilapidated houses came into view in between the rocky terrain. Caddock thought that despite the poor condition, perhaps it was a good alternative to living in beast-infested streets.
Never thought I'd be hunting with a hunter of hunters.
Henriette light-heartedly commented. He sneered towards her.
Does everything always have to be a hunt with you lot?
I'm just saying. Agree it's a bit amusing.
I hunted with many of you in the past, and I'm no longer any form of hunter.
You did? Huh. Since I barely see the crow, I just assumed.
I was a different crow. Many never knew who I was back then, truly.
She fell silent, biting her lower lip. The village stood on rather uneven ground, with houses nestled within stone foundations, cliffs and small hills. Around lay wider farmscapes that had since been deprived of the agricultural coherence, overgrown by whatever nature deemed fit. They walked by a house on a dirt road and stopped, looking over the buildings and towards the large watch keep standing at the edge of the coastal cliff, with the castle Canehurst faintly visible in the distance on the great lake.
Must admit,
She started precariously.
always thought the crow was some sort of legend, explaining away those strange disappearances. Even though you know it's real, it's one of those things that seems a bit too fearsome to be real.
Don't fear it. Respect it.
Yes, that's what I meant.
He looked towards her, but she did not look back, still watching the town. Her eyes tracked an old hunched man walking with a wheelbarrow filled with dirt and patches of grass, glaring at the two of them as he passed. He bumped her arm with his elbow, causing her to jump in place slightly.
Better watch yourself around me. While my wings are gone, my talents remain.
He walked ahead of her.
Quit jesting. How come you be so talked about, but not the current one?
Eileen's her name.
Yes, Eileen. But regardless,
He shrugged while walking.
I have always favored hunting in packs. She doesn't.
you mean it's just a matter of preference? Don't you think it's cowardly to descend upon us like she does? At least you knew them.
He shrugged again, a bit heavier and slouched.
I don't agree. One must have a certain degree of courage to do something so honest, I think.
He stopped to watch an old woman sitting on her porch, but scrambled angrily to her feet and headed inside once their eyes met. He looked around, then pointed up a small stone stair leading to a grassy elevation atop a stone foundation, beyond which lay the coastal keep.
So what's it like?
She said in a softer tone when they began walking in the indicated direction.
The captain warns that misuse of our authority leads to the eye of the crow. But is that truly it? I've heard from veterans the crow have been around for generations.
He shook his head and rolled his eyes.
Heavens. The thing they tell you, church hunters.
Come now, I'm serious. It's about the lives of hunters, for God's sake. Gods know how many you slew.
Plenty. And it's not a question of ethics, as the captain frames it. What I came to see in all those eyes was a plain disregard, disrespect that leads to abuse, addiction.
To blood?
No. The hunting of blood. And I never thought to see hunters seek a prize. Not like the commoner, who just wants that euphoria of blood. No. A hunter hunts. And an unending hunt. Well, that's something you get drunk on.
He walked up to one of the houses and knocked on the door.
Yeah? What do you want?
Just some information, miss. Might I inquire about the old nobility?
A moment passed. He looked back at her, who glanced expectantly between him and the door. Shuffling grew from beyond it, until it stopped, followed by it creaking open slowly. An old woman peeked out, looking awfully perturbed.
What do you come around talking about that for?
I'm sorry if I'm disturbing. I imagined a lot of people would be asking about him.
She inspected him, then Henriette. Her eyes lingered on the sword at her side.
I have nothing to say to the church.
Well, you ought to comply. Henriette spoke unflinchingly. We are conducting an investigation involving the nobles of Canehurst.
Go away. The nobles won't receive you.
What if I've been summoned?
She was about to close the door, but stopped upon him speaking loudly. Her eyes were no longer as skeptical and frustrated, but had narrowed with caution.
They summon no one anymore,
she said with a lower voice. He was aware that his question should sound ridiculous, much like how she responded to it. But she seemed awfully open-minded all of a sudden. He raised his eyebrows at her encouragingly. She glanced once more at Henriette, pursing her lips as she contemplated.
You are a hunter?
Henriette nodded.
Summoned? Yes. How silly of me.
It was uncertain whether she thought his deception was silly, or if she suffered from some form of delusion. But regardless, she opened up the door slightly more and appeared more welcome to them.
Yes. It must be a sign. Why else would a hunter seek the old and forsaken Castle Canehurst? Oh, has it been long? Oh, goodness gracious.
Quiet. The hunt never ends. Say, you must recall hunters passing through Hemwick in the past. Like me now.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. But
Her expression shifted suddenly from a cruel giddiness back to that skeptical frown.
But it cannot be spoken about. Cold winds blow from the castle. You will find naught but wandering spectres.
But hunters have been summoned to the court.
Yes, yes.
She waved with her hand for them to go away, but with a gentle tone like she was addressing children going out to play.
Go on, go. Hurry along. Their majesty never dies. How she must have longed for capable hunters.
I can imagine. There must have been many nights without a worthy hunt.
Oh, indeed. Not a single one, since those brutes committed blasphemous trespass.
She spat on the ground.
But hurry along now. Don't let me keep you.
Her laugh became muffled by the door, then grew fainter as she walked away from it, further into the abode. They looked at each other, then walked away from the house. What in the world? Henriette was flabbergasted. He dismissed her with closed eyes and suddenly shaking his head.
It's just a matter of semantics.
They proceeded along the dirt path, ascending stone steps onto brick foundations leading up the hill. What summon? What do you know that you aren't telling me?
Nothing. A little more now. It's sometimes worth playing along the delusion.
A delusion. Yes, very fruitful.
Not a very good source, I agree. But you noticed how she became more inclined when I simply asked her a question if someone was summoned. As if she wanted it to be true.
Atop the hill was a gate in between rocky walls, leading out into a somewhat extensive graveyard. Henriette put her arms at her side, stopping in the gate, and shook her head smirking. Bravo, Mr. Caddock. You make it sound very simple to tell a lie.
I don't think I ever told a lie. Again, a matter of semantics.
They continued out into the open area that lay just before the steep descent into the lake. On their slight left, the ground sloped upward where the keep stood, seemingly abandoned. The location of the graveyard seemed somewhat strange. Masses of headstones flanked the street leading up to the bridge. Perhaps the open space had once been another form of gathering place for the living, and not for the dead. Now the stones crowded the space to the degree every grave was shared, and upon every stone stood several names. A man was digging in the ground and stopped to look at them. He planted the shovel aggressively into the dirt when they walked past. But he returned to his work when she lay her hand over the handle of her blade. Passing the unsettling field, past a monument in its center, they came to find a curious discovery. When they stood and peered over the edge into the water below from a crumbled bridge foundation, Caddock turned to see Henriette's reaction. She eventually turned his way at a loss for words.
Huh. I thought they exaggerated.
He looked ahead. Far in the distance the bridge continued closer to the island, but the majority was completely gone.
The church did this?
He looked back at her, who also stared ahead at the distant castle.
Must have? Does it answer any of your questions?
His mind was admittedly void of questions, but perhaps it was a very clear answer, one that he had difficulty grasping.
Some of them, perhaps. Seems difficult to reach.
And return from. He nodded.
I suppose I'll have to inquire once more at the captain's. The church must be able to confirm. At least confirm the possibility regarding activity.
So your hunt continues. She smirked at him.
Seems it does. Tell me, what would you say lie at the heart of a pure and true hunt?
She rolled her eyes and at first looked annoyed at him, but then grew thoughtful, so much so her brow sunk a bit.
Well, the prey. Yes, very good. But think larger.
The heart. A purpose?
Good. A hunt always follows a purpose. The old master, the first hunter, knew that better than anyone. And a hunter with a clear purpose will always find prey and remain sober amidst the bloodiest of hunts.
Top hat. Hat worn by hunters who admire formality. Some hunters place an emphasis on form, as seen by the use of the threaded cane. For them, formality, beauty, and justice are the very essence of our humanity, and precisely what keeps hunters from becoming something else.